Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. So we're wrapping things up now.
Yes, it is. I'm feeling it over at work as well. Just,
Yeah.
lots to do, and then of course they conveniently put like a speaker week this week, which is
Oh.
bringing in like guest artists, and
Uh-huh.
so it
So
takes away from.
you did you know about that until this week, or you knew this is something
Yeah,
that
until this week, I
it
just
just
found
sprung
out that they're.
they just
Yeah,
sprung on
so
you?
like great. So I mean, it's good for the students. They get to see and
Yeah,
hear
sure.
other artists talk and present,
Mhm.
and tell them about their journey.
Sure. Oh, that sounds cool.
But yeah, so that's a good part. They get to ask some really good questions because they have Q&A at the end. It's just like any other kind of like art talk, or when somebody presents.
So
But it just takes
is
away from
this
production. This whole.
in person? Are they gonna come in, or are they gonna do it over Zoom, or how
Yeah,
they
it
do it?
was in Yeah, it was in person.
Oh, okay.
We
That's cool.
we have like a theater on
Uh-huh.
campus that
Oh,
I
right.
think it sits like 300 people. So
Uh-huh.
everybody was spread out. The
Oh,
speaker's
that's
on the
cool.
stage, so nobody's near him. So
Mhm.
we were able to conduct it. Everyone's masked, so
Yeah. Well, that's cool.
yeah.
So, Aldrich, I was just wondering how you got along with your stuff. Have you made much progress since the last time we met?
Yeah, I've made a bit of progress.
Okay, cool. Do you wanna show me where you've got to? I was just playing around with your logo. I'll show you what I did in a minute. I was having fun with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll try to let's see. I'll pull up a few things. Let's see. I still don't have it quite down.
Mhm.
The part of setting up animation
Okay.
and all that.
So let me show you what I set up here, so you get an idea. Okay.
Yeah, like you're manipulating the lines and basically creating the lines in the animation program, right?
I just had another go at it because I wanted to try and like finesse it a little bit so that I can understand how best to explain it to you. And so I went through the process again. I had done it before, but at Fullerton, I think I can't for the life of me find what I did with that file. I thought I brought it on a USB, but I couldn't find it. So I set it up again.
Yeah.
And so what I did is I basically split it into pieces so that the body is one piece and the tail is another piece. And I did both of those in Illustrator. So if I open up the tail, I started off with this is your original tail.
Right.
And then basically what I'm doing is I'm making a new layer and then drawing a slightly different version of it. So with each one, I'm just drawing it with the pen tool with that same brush that you're using on it.
Yeah.
And then just going ahead. I've also added a little bit of that idea of easing into it. So these ones are fairly close together, you can see. I also have the end of the tail slightly fluctuating so that it's sort of going backwards and forwards. And then here it gets a bigger movement as it gets towards the middle. This movement gets bigger now because it's accelerating. And then as it comes back to the end, it'll start to slow down again so that swoop is a more natural swoop by having it slow down and speed up. Does that make sense? That idea of having the frames closer together, they're moving more slowly, right? Because they're not traveling as far.
Yeah, that's something that I've noticed a lot.
Yeah,
something I need to focus on and practice some as well.
Yeah, it's a little tricky to get used to at first, but it's a good thing to try to understand. So that I did that in Illustrator, right? And then I also, for the fox, I just took the body part of the logo for the fox without the tail and did this separate. For me, it was just easier. You could do both of these things together if you wanted to, but it was the reason I did it separately is it's easier for me to focus on the movement of one piece at a time. Does that make sense? And ultimately, when I build it in Animate, I'm going to have the tail be a separate, it doesn't have to be, but I would have it be a separate element because it gives me a little bit more control over it. If I want to make that tail a little bit smaller, or if I want to slow just the frames on the tail down, I can do that separate to the body. So I would want to have it be separate if possible. So I've got the fox set up as one Illustrator file, and then the tail set up as another Illustrator file. And then to bring them into Animate, what I've done is, first of all, I brought in just the body. And one of the things I found when I was doing this, let's see on the Illustrator file, on this one, you'll notice that as you go through here, I'm basically just adjusting the shape of this path slightly each time. So there's a variety of different ways you could do that. You could use the direct selection tool and select over points. And then you could use the pencil tool. And as long as the pencil tool is set to edit selected paths, if the path is selected, you could then reshape it a little bit. So that's one fairly simple way to do it. Another way is to select over a set of points in a particular area. So like this area right here. And I could do it with this tool as well, the lasso tool. So select over there. You want to make sure all the other layers are locked. So you're only adjusting them when you want to adjust. And then this tool, which is hidden with the scale tool, the reshape tool, will drag it out from that point. Do you see what I mean? So it's not taking just that point. It's taking all of these and it's, as a percentage, gradually moving them out as if it was being stretched, So that's another way of adjusting it. And I think primarily that was what I was using, but you could use whatever method you'd want to like redraw the different positions. When I brought it into Animate, however, one of the things I found was that if I did it, I think inside the fox, what I've done is I've made a layer inside this fox's body symbol. So if you look inside here, I've got this extra layer here, which I'm going to turn off for a second and make into a guide. So if I play it now, you see how the fox, it kind of looks like you're looking from the back, right? And I don't think that was how you saw it. But do you see it in the same way I see it, Aldrich?
Oh, you mean how the
Like
silhouette makes
head.
it look like it's from the back?
Yeah, doesn't it look like you're looking at it from the back of the head?
A little bit. It's still a little bit abstract. It can be either way,
Yeah, I suppose
I
so.
assume.
Anyway,
But
the
yeah,
reason I put this layer on here, let me change this from being a guide. So in this layer, I put these little lines which kind of create a chin area. It's not quite accurate enough, really, but just so that it feels more like it's facing forwards. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What were the things you changed with it?
So actually, this one I added an extra point there, which I didn't need. This one I think is a little bit off for some reason.
So you added something on a frame?
Yeah, like if you look at this layer here, this is the one I brought in from Illustrator.
Yeah.
So this is exactly the same as this Illustrator file, except that each of the layers has been converted into frames. I'll go through this process in a second. So each of those is a frame now, right? And but on here, to make it look more like, see here, to me, it looked more like I was looking at it from the back. So I added this layer above, and each of the keyframes, I added a little stroke here. So you can choose those same Illustrator brushes actually in Animate as well. You need to, this tool may be hidden from you, but there is a tool which is, it's called the paintbrush tool, this one right here. So there are several different brush tools in Animate, but this one right here is associated with these Illustrator brushes. So I just changed the size then, I think it was 3. But that's the same brush that you were using, I think, or something very similar anyway. And then I'm having to do that. So for each keyframe, I'm just drawing another mark. So I make a blank keyframe, draw a mark, make another blank keyframe, make a mark, make another blank keyframe, make a mark, and so on, to sort of show the shape of the the neck, as it turns around. So you may not want to have that in there, but I just thought I'd show you that anyway. So that was how I would do that. Now, you might want to incorporate the whole logo together into this. So I've put all of this inside one symbol. So this is the whole of the fox is inside of a symbol, and it's on its own layer. And then I can have a separate layer, which is just for the logo itself. So on the Illustrator file for the logo, I think I just started sort of playing with this. We could import all of the layers here so that we can turn layers off, delete stuff, and so on. And then we could bring the animation to fit in with this. So I'm just going to save this as the same name. And then let's go ahead and import this. So when I import this, I want to import it inside of a symbol, because it gives me a little bit more control over it that way. If it's a symbol, I can move it around, I can scale it, even if it has an animation inside of it. So here I've got, again, I'm making a selection of this area. Hang on a sec. Get out of here a sec. Make sure I'm on the right layer here. Come on. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to lock the fox layer, and I'll put it onto here. So I think I've gone over this with you before, but I know we haven't spent a lot of time with this. So basically, my technique for creating symbols is I always just create a rectangle, select it, and then convert it into a symbol rather than making one, because this way I already have it on the stage. So that isn't always essential, but it helps me. It's the way I think about it. It makes more sense to me. So I convert this into a symbol. I'm going to call this the logo. And then if I go inside here, this shape I don't actually need. Then I'm going to go to File, Import, Import to Stage. And this is the logo that I want to import. So this time when I import it, unlike with the fox or with the tail, which I imported as keyframes here, I'm going to import this as animate layers. So you can see I've got all of the layers that I have in the Illustrator file here. And then I'll go ahead and hit import. Okay, so now I've got it in here. I can turn this off. I want to actually put this layer below the fox. Let's move this into position. And then let's scale it so that it's similar size to the actual fox. So as I scale it, I'm going to have to hold shift. My pivot point is in this, should be in the center, make it easier. So I'm going to drag it out, holding shift until I get to roughly the same size that the fox is here. So I made my tail a bit too big, but because the tail is a separate symbol, I can always scale it now. So now if I go inside this symbol, we can get rid of this layer. For right now, I'm just going to change it into a guide. By making it into a guide, that layer won't show up when I export it. And I'll also turn it off here by turning the eye off. I'm also going to get rid of this white shape here for the fox. I'm going to turn that off and also make that into a guide. So by making it into a guide, I don't actually have to delete the layer just in case I need to bring it back again later on. But it won't show up if I exported it as a video or what have you. So we can come out of here. Now we've got the fox in situ. Now, obviously, I'd still have to make that white shape that goes around the outside, but we could do that afterwards on the frames inside of that. For the tail, if I double click on the fox symbol now, so I need to unlock that layer. I'll lock the bottom layer. If I double click on this to go inside the symbol, here's my tail. This itself is its own symbol. So here you can see it's a graphic symbol of the tail. I could scale this down now a little bit smaller. And all the animation is contained within that symbol. So the animation is all getting scaled together. Same with this element as well. So this might want to go over a little bit more.
So I have a question about the symbol. What does it mean in
So,
Illustrator, Animator?
In Illustrator, actually, we also have symbols. So if you go to Window and go down to Symbols, I could actually, before I bring this into Animate, I could actually convert all of this into a symbol. The only trouble with doing that here is that I would lose my layers. So I don't really want to do it here. I want to do it once I get into the Animate. But you can use symbols in the same way here.
Okay. And it works like a stamp.
So a symbol is basically a container. And so the way it works in Animate is a little bit different than in Illustrator. So in Illustrator, they're used for a couple of reasons. One of them, you can use it because it uses up less memory. So let's say you're doing an illustration and you want to have thousands of little trees in the background. You can make it into a symbol, and then you could repeat that tree throughout the entire background, and it's not really taking up any more memory because it's just referencing the symbol. In the animation, it becomes more important because you can have an animation within that symbol. So in the case of the tail, for instance, the movement of the tail has its own timeline, and the movement of the body has its own timeline. So it's a container for that part of the animation. And then I have the tail and the body inside of another symbol. So you can have symbols inside symbols. So now I can have this fox, which if I wanted to, I could have it grow or scale or fade in or fade out, because that whole symbol could be animated as well. But within there, at the same time, you could have the animation of the fox moving backwards and forwards and the tail moving. So a symbol is like a container, and then you can put other things inside that container. But it's basically, in the case of Animate, it's a container for animation. Does that make sense? So in this case, when I go down to the main timeline, right now I have this layer, which is called layer 3, but I should really call this logo. So I've got one layer which has got the logo itself on, right? And then I've got one layer that's got the fox on. Both of these are symbols. Now, in this particular case, the logo itself doesn't really necessarily need to be a symbol at this point if it's just going to sit there. So the reason for me making it into a symbol to some extent here is it tidies up the timeline. So I just have this one element on the timeline with this one layer, and I can then double click to go inside if I want to edit it. So in the case of getting rid of the fox and the fox's outline, for instance, I could double click, go inside it, hide that, then come back outside of it. And now we've got this, and I can move this symbol. So this is a separate symbol. This symbol you can see is called Fox Complete. So all of these symbols are stored within the library. So I have the fox itself, which is actually the fox's body. The reason I called this one Fox Complete was because I'd already made one called Fox. But the Fox Complete allows me to move the tail and the fox together. So it's a little bit like grouping as well. Like in Illustrator, when you group objects together, it's a little bit like that, except that it's a bit more than that because it's a container that will allow you to scale them together. You can also do things to those symbols. So for instance, like on this symbol that we've got of the fox now, we might be able to do something to change the look of it. Let's see, we can do, I'm going to make a duplicate of this layer actually. And then on the duplicate of this layer, let's see if we can tint it. I was hoping I could tint the inside, but I think I'd actually have to color it. But we can, with the symbol, you can change the color of the object by using these tints. And then because this whole thing is a symbol, you could do things like lower the opacity on it. So if I select that symbol, if you went under alpha, you could adjust the opacity and have it be transparent or semi-transparent. Doesn't seem to be affecting it. So, oh, that's weird. I must have had the wrong thing selected, I think. Oh, I've got the one underneath. Oh, I see, because I've got another version underneath. That's right. So it has become transparent, actually. It's just that I'd forgotten I'd made a duplicate of that layer. You delete that for a second. So does that help to make you understand the idea of the symbols? If I go inside this one, the way that we know that we're inside of a symbol is up here at the top. You see how it says scene 1? So that's the main timeline. If we go outside of here, right now on the main timeline, I have 3 seconds worth of animation that plays. And then if I go inside the symbol for the fox, we then have 2 other symbols. One which is for the fox itself, the body, which is just called fox, and then one which is for the tail. So this is a container and this is a container. And then both of those are inside of another cell. So if I go inside this, now we're inside one symbol, and then we've got inside another symbol that's inside of that. Does that make sense?
Somewhat.
Somewhat. It is confusing, I know. And it's one of those things that I think to some extent you have to sort of get by trying it and working with it a little bit. But basically, I think that's the easiest way to think of it, is that to think of it as like a container for the animation.
So as a container, as if it were a layer.
It's a little bit different from a layer, because actually the container itself can have layers as well. So I suppose you could think of those as sub layers. But if you want to animate something, you can animate a raw shape in Animate. So for instance, you could draw a rectangle and you could have it morph into a circle by doing a shape tween. But generally, when you're trying to animate something, if you want to move something from one place to another, you have it be a symbol, and then you go further down the timeline and then make some change on a keyframe, and then you create a tween in between. So let's say, for instance, here you want the logo itself to kind of show up gradually. We could have one keyframe here, have another keyframe maybe halfway through, create a classic tween between the two, and then on the first keyframe I could have the whole of this symbol. So I need to unlock my layer. But basically what I'm going to do is unlock this layer and then select that first keyframe. The current layer is locked. Should I have to unlock it? Yes. So if I select here, and then I can go over to the color effects in the properties, click on where it says none and change it to alpha and lower it to 0. So now this is going to gradually fade in. We've got one instance of the symbol here, and we have another instance of the symbol here. So the other changes that you could make to it is I could also have it scale up at that point. So here, for instance, if I scale it down at the very beginning like this, now when it drags in, it's going to scale up and then also fade in. So again, if you're making an animation like this type of animation where you're using a tween, or at least a classic tween, you want to go from one instance of a symbol to another instance of the same symbol. All right. And so it has to be a symbol to do that.
Yeah.
All right.
What did you change to let it fade or shrink?
I'll do it again. Okay. Let me backtrack a second. So this right now, we're on the main timeline. We're not inside any of the symbols. Okay. So on the main timeline, I've got the logo, which is this layer. It's just that graphic of the crafty fox with the blue background and this and the line. And then the other layer has the fox on it. Okay.
Okay. The layer with the fox has the symbol of the fox and the tail.
Yes, exactly. So, and then that is separated, but not on the main timeline. So this is one symbol for the fox, which is called fox complete. And then if I go inside that, in here, we've got 2 layers. One is for the tail and one is for the fox's body. And they could actually be on one layer in this particular case, but I think it's easier to control it if they're on separate layers. And so each one of these is a separate symbol. The body, if I go inside that, now has this timeline, which has the frame by frame animation, which is what makes it turn. And then if I go back out of that one, so I can go back to Fox complete. Here, the tail, if I double click on that, this has got all of those frames for the tail. So if I wanted to slow this down, I could go in between each frame and do F5. And then the tail would be running more slowly. I'll undo that. Okay, so going back to the beginning again, going back to the main timeline again, if I wanted to have this fade in, so first of all, I'm going to get rid of this white background. If I double click on this symbol, we've got all of these layers. There's actually no time on this one because there's no animation in here really. It's just all staying on this frame throughout. But on the bottom here, I can delete that layer. I don't really need that. And then we go back out of here. So now on the main timeline, I'm going to go out to about here, and I'm going to insert a keyframe here. So to do this, you can right click and then choose insert keyframe, or control click if you're on a Mac. You're on a PC though, right? So right click and insert a keyframe, and then put your cursor anywhere in between those 2 keyframes. A keyframe is a point where something changes. So here we can make this different than that in some way. That's the change. So it could be that it's bigger. It could be that it's rotated. It could be that it's a different color. It could be, you know, whatever you're going to do to change it. But that'll be what the tween will do. The tween makes the frames in between those 2 positions. So if I choose create classic tween by right clicking there, so it doesn't matter where you are in between those 2 keyframes. You just right click and then choose create classic tween. And then I go back to the first keyframe, because on this one, what I want to do is to have it, first of all, we'll do it fade out. So to have it fade out, I select that symbol. So I first go to the frame and make sure I'm on the right frame. Then I select the symbol. So you'll see that this properties panel changes. If you just click here, this will be to do with the frame itself or the tween. But if I click on the symbol, now it's to do with the symbol. So I can change the symbol to alpha 0. The other one's still at 100. So this tween in between, it comes from the word in between. So that tween is making all of those frames that are necessary to have it transition from being transparent to being visible. And then the same thing if you're scaling it, of course. So if I was to select this frame and then take the transform tool and scale it holding shift so I can constrain the proportions. Now we have it getting larger and fading in at the same time. Does that make sense? I think it really helps to break it down though into separate chunks. For me anyway, it was definitely much easier for me to have the tail be separate. Now, the bit that I don't have right now is the white that goes around the fox. So you could manually go in, if I go inside the fox, for instance, and I could start at the beginning, add another layer at the bottom. And we'd already have one keyframe at the very beginning. You could just, on this frame, you could just sort of paint a shape underneath it.
You mean like manually fill it in?
Yeah, so if you went around here, you actually don't need to fill in the whole thing. You have a little bit of an outline.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that right now it looks like I'm painting over the top of that black, but because I'm doing this on a separate layer, once I let go, it should be underneath the black. And then because I'm actually creating a vector shape, we can select the inside of that shape. Let me turn off this other layer for a second.
Right.
This would be easy in Illustrator. Maybe it's not so easy actually in Animate to select that inside. Yeah, it's kind of, oh, there we go. So I was able to delete the inside by using the sub-selection tool. Select it. You have to click a couple of times to delete it, but then you can delete that. And then if I turn this back on, bear in mind that that's only on that frame. Okay, so I would also need to have it on the next frame, but you can see that in the next frame, it's not that different. So if I went here and did insert keyframe, it'll keep this one that I've already got. And now I can modify it slightly here. Now, at this point, I could use the sub-selection tool, maybe. I can maybe use the pen tool to take out some anchor points. We could also use the eraser and erase parts of the line. Trying to think which would be the easiest way for you to do it. Probably the eraser, I would imagine. Let's try. Yeah, you could just erase those bits that you don't need on there. And then obviously if there was bits that you needed to add to it, like when we come around the other side, you might need to add a little bit more, then you could just paint back into it again. So then you do the next keyframe. So this one I'm a little bit off. I'll just move that, drag it back to add another keyframe here. Does this make sense to you, Aldrich? The way that the keyframes work?
Yeah, I believe so. It's
So
it's a container and all that.
Well, so with these keyframes, the frames that I'm adding here, it's basically where something changes, right? So there's a keyframe here, and then anywhere where you see a black dot is a keyframe. After that, there are other frames here, but it's just staying in the same place. So in this case, it's animating basically on 5s. So it's a very crude animation. Usually you'd animate on 2s. So you'd have a frame, a keyframe, then you'd have a repetition of that frame. So it's on 2s. Then you'd have a new keyframe if you're doing frame by frame animation. But if you're doing
keyframe, is it on the timeline? The keyframe is just a visual guide.
No, it's where something can happen. So in this case, like if you right now that white shape is going to stay the same all the way to the end now, right? But if I want it to change at that point where I want it to change, so here, because the line is changing from this point to this point, I could add another point here. So I add another keyframe, insert keyframe, and then I can modify this shape again. So I can select this shape, and then using the eraser, I can erase part of it.
Oh, because you inserted a keyframe there, it allows you to edit in that way?
Yeah, so I mean, I could edit it before I added a keyframe, but of course it's going to edit the frames before as well. So by adding that keyframe, everything before it is going to stay the same, but just at that point, it's going to start to change. So here, actually, it looks like I need to take off a little bit more there.
Then as you were showing the tween effects, also you'd use the keyframes?
Yeah, so for the tweens, you create a keyframe at the beginning and at the end of a movement. So like whatever that changes, let's say something's getting bigger, from when it's very small to very big, you'd have 2 keyframes, one when it's very small, one when it's very big. And then the tween is everything in between, right? So it's just it's automatically creating all of those additional frames. Here we're having to manually create frames because you can't really tween this shape. We might be able to do it as a shape tween actually. So a shape tween would work like this, but let's see, because shape tweens are a little bit fiddly sometimes, but we can try it. Let me just add a keyframe here. Insert keyframe. So I want to modify this shape. So I'm going to take a little bit off the top of this here. And then with the brush tool, I'm going to add a little bit more onto this to erase that a bit. So something like that. If we were to tween between those two shapes, let me see. From this one, I need to add a little bit more as well, actually. So you could make a shape tween between these, I think. Let's make sure that this is a raw shape. So actually we have two drawing shapes. So this is what's called a drawing object. We need them to be a raw shape to create a shape tween. So I can do Command B to make them into raw shapes. When you see the selection like this, so the reason it's drawing as a drawing object is that I must have drawing object chose nothing. Let's see. If I draw onto this, it's going to make a drawing object. Yeah, it is. That's weird. Right. But once you do Command B and break them apart, you can then go in and I've added an extra keyframe. I added an extra keyframe by having this playhead in the wrong position when I was making a change to it. So you just have to be a bit aware of that. I do that all the time. It's really annoying. So let me just get
What was in what position?
So like if I have this playhead, this blue line,
that
in between the keyframes, it'll make a new keyframe. So it sort of throws things out a little bit. Anyway, I was going to see if I can make a shape tween between these two. So let's see. I'm going to lock these two layers. Make sure that this is a raw shape, which it's not.
So you're saying it needs to be converted to a raw shape before it can be affected by a tween?
For it to be affected by a shape tween. So there's a couple of different types of tweens. One of them is a classic tween, which you would do like if you have a symbol and you want to go from that symbol to another one, another instance of the same symbol, then you would use a classic tween. But if you want to go from a shape to another shape, now I don't think this is going to work terribly well, but I'll try it. We'll make sure that this is all a raw shape. And then we'll try creating a shape tween. Yeah, you see what happens here is that it doesn't really know where to morph to. So it creates this really weird transition. So I'm just going to keep it as a frame by frame animation in this particular case. I kind of suspected that that's probably what was going to happen here. I forgot where they changed this to. Oh, there it is. So this is set to drawing object, but I don't seem to be able to take that off for some reason. Where is that? I don't want it to be a drawing object. I just want to be able to paint onto it, but I can draw it, select it again, and then do Command B to make it into a raw object. And then once it's a raw object, it'll all merge together. So I have one more frame here. That one's actually pretty good anyway, so I could just leave it maybe. So I insert a keyframe just in case. I'll clean this bit up a little bit. So now we've got it with the white background on the fox at least. So that would be my suggestion for the process overall. Does that help?
Yeah, it's starting to.
Then obviously I'll post the video afterwards so you can go over it. And so that just to recap the files, that I had an Illustrator file of the logo initially that you'd given me some time back, and I separated. So the fox's body is one Illustrator file, which I separated. Well, I created first of all one of them, and then that was the original one. And then I redrew it, or edited it, I should say, on each layer. So duplicate the layer, edit it a little bit, duplicate the layer, edit it a little bit, and then save that as an Illustrator file. To bring those in, because I don't think I went over this, when I brought that in as a symbol, the way that I would bring it in is like this. So if I wanted to bring it in again, I make a rectangle for it. So this, as I said before, is just a way for me to create a symbol. Modify, convert to symbol. I'll call this Fox2. And then I'll go inside of there and delete this shape. And then I'll go to File, Import, Import to Stage. Then I find that file, Fox, open it. And in here, I have a couple of different options of how I import it. But for this, I want it as keyframes, because each of those layers in the Illustrator file is going to be converted into a keyframe, which is what I want. And then I choose Import. And then I'm going to zoom in on the timeline a little bit. So right now it's animating on ones, which would be pretty fast. So to add some frames in between, you can go to insert timeline frame. F5 is the keyboard shortcut, so normally you'd want to do it that way. But you can also do it by right-clicking and choosing insert frame. But basically, we're inserting the same frame again. So this one is just going to last a little bit longer. So that's what slows it down. So if I do F5 again, F5 again, F5 again, F5 again, F5 again, it's going to be going half the speed that it was. So if I go back to the main timeline now, this is basically the same animation. I think this one might be going a little bit slower. I might have changed it. And then remember, I added those marks for the neck, which this one doesn't have. And then I imported the tail into another symbol in just the same way. And then once I brought them into here, and I have the fox and the tail, I had made those into a symbol as well. Does that help?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to work at that.
Do you have something you want to share with me that you've started
about the
for
on
the
the
animation
part?
Yeah. You said you started something on it, right? But you weren't quite sure.
Just a few. Just a few of the just a few layers.
Okay.
Just setting up the layers.
Okay, and that's for the movement of the fox, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then, so just to remind you, this Thursday is going to be the last class. So you want to make sure that the visual identity is as complete as possible. And then also don't forget that there's also that 5th project, which I don't think you've started on, right?
Yeah,
Did you start on the poster project?
I started on the poster project.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, I thought you were further behind than you were actually. So you started on this one then, right? The order versus chaos.
Yeah, I've started on that one. I'm maybe 40%.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm not having too much trouble with that one.
Okay, it's more the animation one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so the one thing I would suggest is, as far as the overall, like in terms of the strategy of finishing stuff up by the end of the semester, if the animation is taking up too much of your time and you're not able to get everything else done, leave that to last, and you could do something relatively simple, okay, to fulfill the requirement of the animation. I don't want it to like stop you from getting, because I'm kind of excited about the idea of you animating that fox, but in terms of fulfilling the requirement, you could possibly do something simpler than that if you're short of time and you don't feel like you're going to get other parts of the stuff completed. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. Okay, very good. Do you have any questions for me?
I had one.
There's also the
So.
font project, which is like an extra credit assignment if you wanted to do it. I'm not sure if you were interested in doing that one, but
I don't know if I have time for that one.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, I guess
Kevin, you were working on the font one, I think, right?
Yeah, I'm kind of just getting some ideas down. I did land up getting the software. Um,
Oh, okay, cool.
so I'm just, yeah, just kind of like working, in a sketchbook, coming up
Okay.
with just ideas.
Okay,
Um,
great.
and
And
then
then
I'll
you're
transfer that
pretty
into.
much done with everything else, right? You have the visual identity done and the posters done.
Yeah, the poster I need to still kind of do the deconstruction one. That was the one
Okay.
that I was just trying to like, for me,
Uh,
it's actually more of a challenge. Like, how do I make it look like break it apart? Because I want to make it look all uniform. And,
yeah, I know what you
so
mean.
yeah, so it's a challenge to go the opposite direction of like, how
Sure,
do I
yeah.
make it look chaos, but yet,
Uh-huh.
so yeah, I'm
It is
that,
tricky.
that, yeah, so that one is, I'm just looking at more, other, um, that's why I was
Examples and
asking about
stuff.
the links that you have there. So I was looking at the links and reading up
Uh-huh.
on the deconstruction and just seeing how that's approached.
Okay.
So that, yeah. So I still need to do that one.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, I look forward to seeing the final stuff on Thursday. It's very exciting. Hopefully Harrison will also have finished his projects up. He sent me a message the other day that he was saying he was scrambling with other classes, but he hasn't quite dropped completely. He's still finishing stuff up. So hopefully we'll have 3 people to present on Thursday. All right.
It sounds good.
All right.
Yep.
I will see you on Thursday. Bye, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ron.
Bye.